I'm joined by Sarah J. Rahman from One Fair Wage, who's also a professor at Berkeley and has been fighting for a higher minimum wage for many years now. And we're at a pivotal moment in it. So Sarah, what has to happen to actually get to a $15 minimum wage over the next couple of weeks? What are the hinge points?
So first of all, at the end of January, the Raise the Wage Act was introduced in the House and in the Senate. It's let's be clear, a standalone bill that proposes raising the minimum wage for all workers to 15 and eliminating the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, which is still $2.13 an hour, eliminating sub-minimum wages for workers with disabilities and for youth. So it is comprehensive, it is incredible, and it is historic because it will represent the first time actually since emancipation of slavery that we're not just raising the minimum wage, we are proposing to actually eliminate these sub-minimum wages that are direct legacies of slavery. So that was introduced at the end of January as a standalone bill, but it is being included in the overall COVID package that Biden proposed even before his inauguration, and that the House is likely to pass at the end of this week. So the House has actually cleared the way for that Raise the Wage Act that includes 15 and elimination of the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers to be included in the COVID package. Now the question is, will the Senate parliamentarian allow for this $15 bill, the Raise the Wage Act, to be included in the Senate COVID package? But I think it's so important for people to understand whether or not it gets included, and the decision from the parliamentarian will come down this week. Whether or not it gets included doesn't really matter. I mean, it matters in a huge way in that, in that, of course, if it becomes part of the COVID package, then you only need 51 votes in the Senate, and it has a very good chance of passage. What I meant by it doesn't matter is only that it should not matter to us as people who believe that Democrats need to deliver in terms of raising the minimum wage, in that it is a standalone bill that doesn't die if it doesn't get included in the COVID package. In other words, if it gets included, great, we move quickly to passage. If it doesn't get included, we need to push on our elected officials, both Democrats and Republicans, to get it done.
Right. Now, Bernie Sanders, who happens to be the Budget Committee chair, has said he's confident that the parliamentarian will allow the minimum wage to go through under reconciliation. But let's say that his confidence is misplaced, and we learn next week that it's not going to go in. Then what are the different paths towards passage? I guess on the one hand, you have eliminating the filibuster, which ought to be done. But if you're somebody who wants a raise in the minimum wage, you would probably hope that there's some other possibility just in case that doesn't happen. So what are the other leverage points that people are looking at? And how confident are you that the filibuster will get eliminated?
Yeah, I actually think the decision from the parliamentarian will come down this week, not next week. So we may hear any day, any minute, not this week. And I do agree with Sanders that in the sense that there should be absolutely no reason whatsoever that this doesn't get included. I can tell you any number of ways in which this is a COVID emergency. Just quickly, for tipped workers, they are right now earning so little and their tips are so low, and they're being asked to remove their masks, women in the industry, so that men can judge their looks and therefore their tips on that basis. If they don't get paid, they get exposed to the virus. It is a COVID emergency. It is a budget issue. So I agree with Sanders that it should be included. If it doesn't get included, there are really two options. One is for us to push on Democrats to get rid of the filibuster, to go past the filibuster and still do this with 51 votes. The other is to get 10 Republicans and to have 60 votes in the Senate with 10 Republicans.
Any hope for 10 Republicans? Or one?
Exactly. I think there's always hope. I know. I believe that President Biden believes that he can negotiate with 10 Republicans.
Well, we know that, yes.
And I think the fact that he believes that, to me, indicates that he's willing to figure out leverage points and negotiate with 10 Republicans. Now, what is negotiated? Is it the rate of pay? Is it the length of time that it takes to get to 15 or whatever wage is decided on? Is it the exclusion, for example, of tipped workers, which the National Restaurant Association is pushing for with all of their heft and their might? That's what we're worried about is, sure, let's negotiate with Republicans, but does that mean we give up the most critical parts of the minimum wage bill?
On the question of the sub minimum wage, you mentioned it. You mentioned it as a legacy of slavery. The best argument that somebody could make for it would be to say, look, there are some people with disabilities out there who want to participate in regular life in the same way that other workers do, but because of the disability they have in a totally kind of competitive free market, they would never be able to compete with workers who don't have that same disability. But in order to live a full dignified life, they want to be part of the economy, and so therefore, you have to allow for some people with disabilities to be paid a lower minimum wage, or else they won't be able to participate in those jobs. What is the counter? What is the counter to that argument?
Well, first of all, I think it's important we realize we're talking about 3 sub-minimum wages in this bill. So one is the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. That's the one I mentioned is a direct legacy of slavery.
Oh, okay.
Then there's the sub-minimum wage for workers with disabilities, which has been, since its inception, a direct reflection of the worth and value that America places on people with disabilities. And then there's the sub-minimum wage for youth. I mean, the truth is that all of these have been direct valuations. For tipped workers, it was started at emancipation. It's a direct valuation of Black people and now women, because 70% of tipped workers are women. For people with disabilities, obviously it's a valuation of people with disabilities as being less than, and with youth, same thing. What I would argue, to somebody who says, oh, these people want opportunities, is that the truth is that people with disabilities currently work in a lot of different environments. And if employers want to profit off the value of their labor, they should pay them a minimum wage like every other worker. I think as long as we allow employers to make these exceptions and pay lesser wages to anybody in our society, it frankly drives down the wage floor for everybody. It creates more and more incentives. We saw this with the tip minimum wage. The existence of the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers in the restaurant industry allowed gig companies like DoorDash and Instacart to say, oh, we should be able to deduct worker payments based on how much they get tipped. So as long as there's a sub-minimum wage for anybody, it affects all of us.
Right. So on the question of Joe Manchin, who has been insisting that he won't do any more than an $11 minimum wage. If you look at the West Virginia wage, wages across West Virginia, it looks like about half. And you probably know these numbers better than me, but it seemed like about half of West Virginia workers, or maybe slightly more, earn actually less than $11 an hour. The wage disparity that exists regionally in this country isn't something that people might even understand if they haven't spent some time in other parts of the countries, other parts of the country. And so what is the path to getting somebody like Manchin on board with a $15 minimum wage for tipped and across the board when West Virginia is so far behind at this point?
So first of all, I think it's so important to understand where these numbers come from. Senator Manchin got that $11 number by looking at the MIT living wage calculator that tells you, depending on the size of your household, how much money you need to live to afford not just rent and food, but things like childcare or housing, all of the things that you need to live. And that $11 number comes from looking at a single person with no children. In West Virginia, if you have even one child or one other person in your household, the living wage is actually $22 an hour. It's $10.87 with one person, no children. Now, a third of minimum wage workers have children in West Virginia, and the median age is in the 30s. It's not teenagers supporting themselves. That's not who lives on the minimum wage in West Virginia. It's adults with children. And so I think it's just the wrong calculation. And what we are doing with groups in West Virginia is lifting up the voices and the data from actual minimum wage workers who are largely women, who are largely trying to feed their children on these wages, and also small businesses who are saying, we've heard from childcare employers, for example, or owners of childcare businesses who say the parents who use our services can't afford childcare, and that hurts our business. So the efforts in West Virginia are to allow him to hear from West Virginians. And in fact, tomorrow we're releasing a poll that shows the majority of West Virginians, more than 60%, support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Is it having an effect? Do you think you can nudge him higher?
I think so. I think we will see that not only he, but also potentially Republicans can be moved on this issue. Yes.
Thanks so much for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.